Good morning and good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. We're excited to have you today. We're going to give it just another minute or two as folks are streaming into the webinar. If you are just joining us, please feel free to get comfortable and feel free to add in the chat your name and where you're calling in from. We would love to know where you are calling in from today. Thank you. And again, for those of you that are just joining, welcome to our webinar today. We'd love to know where you're calling in from. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We've got some folks from Maryland, West Virginia, South Carolina, ooh, Hawaii. We have folks from all over. Excellent. Welcome, everybody. I see some folks from our community colleges. I also see some folks from our four-year institutions. So I want to make sure for those that are from four-year institutions, today's webinar is going to be focused on community college relationships and partnerships in particular. So if you are here because you're thinking about the attrition and the partnerships that you have with your community colleges, by all means, feel free to stay. If you are not and you're thinking about employer relations specifically from a four-year institution perspective, I just want to make sure you know what you're walking into at the start of our webinar and for you to join a separate one if this is not what you thought it would be. So again, for those that are from four-year institutions, today's webinar is going to be focused specifically on community colleges and employer relations from that standpoint. Great. All right. I see a few more folks that are trickling in. So I'm going to start with just a little bit of housekeeping, and then we will jump right into our conversation today. So again, thank you all for joining me. We're really excited to have you here today. Before we get started, I'm just going to cover a few items. We always get lots of questions about whether or not you are going to get a copy of this recording. Yes, everything is being recorded, and yes, you will receive a copy of the recording. So rest assured this webinar is going to be recorded and you will receive an email after the webinar is over. So please feel free. You're welcome to take notes, but you're also welcome to just sit back and listen and engage in the conversation. Now, although you will not be able to, we can't see you, this is the webinar feature of Zoom, we do encourage you to ask questions. There is a questions sort of icon at the very bottom of your Zoom screen. Feel free to send in questions as the webinar is going. You don't need to wait until the end. We have two lovely team members that are here. They're going to be collecting those questions and they're going to be grouping them into several themes so that I can ask the panelists once we get towards the end of today's webinar. And today's webinar, for those of you that are curious, will be an hour long. So we will run until noon if you're on Pacific time, 3 if you're on Eastern time. Okay. Great. Let's go right into our agenda for today. So we're going to do some brief introductions. We're going to get into the panel discussion, and then we're really going to open up to Q&A. It's very excited for that. All right, without further ado, I would love to introduce my several panelists here today. We're going to start with Robert Simmons, who is here from Dell. He has really been charged in running the strategic initiatives around community college recruitment. And so, Robert, we're so excited to have you today. Robert, where are you calling in from?
Hey, good afternoon and good morning. Robert Simmons, I'm calling in from Oklahoma City, about 56, 60 degrees out, light winds and sunny.
I love it. I love the weather report with the introduction. All right, next up we have Sandy McKnight. Sandy, you are joining us from Tri-C. Good to have you with us here today.
Thank you, and good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I'm actually calling from, I will say, not so sunny Cleveland, Ohio, but it's great to be part of the conference call, so thank you so much.
You're welcome. And last but not least, we have Rufus from the League of Innovation. Rufus, where are you calling in from today?
I am calling in from Phoenix, Arizona, and it is a nice sunny day and about 91 degrees. So it's a pleasure to be with all of you today, and thanks for sharing the weather. It reinforces why I'm in Phoenix as well.
Excellent. Good decision making, Rufus. And for those of you that don't know me, my name is Cruzvergara. I'm the Chief Education Strategy Officer here at Handshake, and I'll be moderating today's panel. So I realize we have a good number of new folks on the panel today. So I'm just going to have one slide to tell you a little bit more about Handshake. I know some of the panelists will likely reference some aspects of Handshake and some of the things they do. So this is just to provide you with a little bit of context so you can put all of their comments sort of in place. Now we're very fortunate that we are the largest early talent network out there. We partner with over 1,100 universities and colleges, most recently really expanding into the community college space with about 500,000 employers and over 8 million active students. So that number has actually since changed since we made this slide, which is very, very exciting. We work with our colleges and universities to really bring all of the employers and the students together and to ideally democratize that opportunity so that employers are able to find great talent regardless of what school they might be at, regardless of what geographic location the students may be living, and for students to be able to find opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't have had access to. That is very much at the core of our mission. Our three founders all went to school in Michigan Tech. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with where Michigan Tech is located, it is about 6 and 9 hours respectively north of Chicago and Detroit and receives over 300 inches of snow a year. And so this was a deeply held problem that they themselves as students experienced, where they weren't getting a lot of recruiters and a lot of employers that were reaching out to students at Michigan Tech, and they were trying to figure out how do they get access to some of these opportunities. There must be a way to be able to build technology to actually help with that, to help with equity, and to be able to make it a little bit easier for both students and employers to be able to connect. And so hence you have Handshake. We're really thrilled that 6-7 years later, we have remained true to that mission, and we continue to aim for the greater piece of how do we continue to increase access and equity for all students, and as we think about that. So today's panel is going to be quite exciting, as I know many of you have been thinking about the role of community colleges and where it fits. The pandemic, quite frankly, really accelerated a lot of trends that we were already seeing, not only in career education, but also in employer and recruiting practices. And so today, as we kick off this panel with our three panelists, we're really going to talk about the impact and trends that COVID-19 had on community colleges in particular. We're going to talk about the role of community colleges in economic growth and development as we emerge out of the pandemic. And we're also going to talk about what ideal partnerships between community colleges and employers can really look like as we move forward into the future. And again, thank you all that are joining. I know several others have just joined. If you are joining from a four-year institution and you didn't catch the opening, we are focused on community colleges and employer relations in particular today. So if that is not what you came here for, I just wanted to make sure you knew that at the top of the hour. All right, with that, let's jump right into the panel. Sandy, I'm going to start with you because you are live on the ground with all of the students and all of your team members. What was this last year like with COVID-19? What were some of the biggest challenges, like your top 3 challenges? And at the same time, what were maybe the top 3 successes or things that actually were silver linings that came out of COVID-19, came out of this situation?
I would say that one of the challenges that we had was student engagement, was how do we continue to engage students and also engage our employers? What we found that everybody was emailing everybody. I mean, it was just kind of like email overload. And so one of the things that we had to do is, in order to connect with our students, is find a way to really try to personalize the message. Sending personalized emails, and Handshake allowed us to do that. We set up academic pathways, and we set even our events and things like that. We did targeted events. We felt that that was the best way to do things. So again, one of our challenges was, how to communicate. Another challenge was, how do we continue to provide those programming and those services that we typically would have done on ground virtually? So for example, career fairs. Instead of doing an in-person career fair, how do you make that career fair engaging, and how do you provide those services to a student? So what we decided to do, instead of doing a career fair in the fall and doing a big career fair in the spring, we decided to do targeted career fairs, and we were able to manage it a lot better virtually by doing that. For example, just doing a targeted career fair for IT, or even if it were a career exploration event. Some of the things that we typically would do is for career exploration is provide job shadowing experiences, or we would do career field trips. How do you do those kinds of things? How do you expose students to a career when they can't get there in person? So what we decided to do was do some virtual career fair, not virtual career fairs, virtual career fairs, but also career exploration. So we did who's hiring event, or we did employer panels. That was the other way to expose students for our accounting department. So working very collaboratively with our faculty to do that. So I would say, those were some of the challenges and some of the other things, but I'll say there's always a silver lining. It really accelerated some of the things that we wanted to be able to do. And again, having to be a little bit more creative. We found that some of our students weren't able to do sort of the traditional internships. So we did micro internships, and we were able to do some of those things virtually, have that gig work set up, because we knew that some of our students, again, also may not have the technology. So we also had to provide the technology they would need, laptops and mobile hotspots. So again, I would say challenges were technology, being able to, again, to provide those rich services that you wanted to do on ground. And then how do you communicate, or how do you engage with students? Those were sort of some of the challenges, but also some of the successes that we had. Being able to pilot some new things, and micro internships, we piloted through a grant and was very successful. So it'll be something that we definitely will try to get funding for in the fall.
That's great. Super helpful, Sandy. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like one of the things that both I heard you say when we were prepping for this, but also just now in your answer, is that you were really thinking about sort of what's the experience that you want your students to have, and not just trying to replicate and take everything that was physical and make it virtual. You weren't trying to just slap virtual in front of all the things that you were doing before, but really rethinking what that experience could look like, and kind of going to that core problem or the core question, and not letting the previous sort of operations or what you had done before hinder you in that. Would that be a correct assumption in sort of how you and your team approached figuring out what are the new things and how do we actually make this a success?
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Robert, I'm curious from your perspective as an employer, what were some of the biggest challenges that you all faced as you also had to pivot immediately into a virtual world? And what were some of the major lessons learned for you as you continue to think through not only what you were doing at Dell, but then also the partnership that you were starting to think about with lots of community colleges in your role as well?
Yeah, look, COVID hit us, and it was just tough, and for everybody it was overnight, right? I think one of the first things, and I think Sandy, you just kind of said it, is you just had to kind of step back and think about what are we doing and how do we pivot. Some of it was honestly for us slapping virtual in front of some of the things we were already doing, but then also just really thinking about it differently. So I'll use our intern program as an example. Is we've got a very robust intern program at Dell. We hire upwards of 1,000 interns a summer or so. And so that's a critical piece of, one, our diversity pipeline, but two, our pipeline into the company, very critical. So you couldn't really throw that out. But how do you have a successful internship while you're going through where we can't talk or touch or be within, a certain amount of area of each other? So we went virtual. We created what we call, we went to the agile methodology, if anyone is familiar with that, and created communities of practice where we had cohorts of interns. So instead of being kind of a one-to-one intern, you really worked on an intern team. And that actually was really good. We did shorten the internship, which is typically 12 weeks. I think it went down to 9 weeks last year, but it was a success. Our net promoter score, which we measure from a recommendation standpoint via surveys, I think went up 14 points last year in a pandemic, which is, phenomenal, and those type of things. So for us, the challenges were just really rethinking, how do we continue to keep the ship afloat? Our UR program is really the foundation of a lot at Dell. How do we keep that ship afloat? How do we influence our business units? That was critical as well, because we also have to shape the way that they think about attracting and acquiring talent from these sources. And people just think differently about it. And frankly, UR is not easy. It seems easy, but it's not that easy. And so those are some other challenges. So we leverage data, we leverage partners such as Handshake as well. to help kind of mitigate some of those and make sure that we were able to present what was happening, not just from a Dell standpoint, but also from our constituents and what they were going through and how they were managing it. And then the decisions that we made, we wanted to be on par. So if companies were in our space anyway, we're still having an internship. From a competitive standpoint, we still needed to have ours, and we needed to make sure we were thoughtful on how we did it, but we can't afford to lose to some of our competitors in that space from a talent standpoint. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, Robert, if you're able to sort of speak to this. I can't remember if you were at Dell during the recession of 2008, but we heard from a lot of employers that they learned lessons from the last recession, kind of this time around too. Obviously a completely different situation, but there were many employers that pulled back completely on their recruiting during the last recession. They stopped going to campus for obviously different reasons. And they decided instead that they were just going to sort of pause, and they found that the restart was even harder. And so I sort of hear in what you're saying, you needed to make sure you didn't have to restart and you sort of kept some things going. I'm curious if there were certain lessons that Dell was sort of like, hey, we've been through this before. It was a different situation, but we need to make sure we're not making some of the same mistakes. Were there certain things in particular that really stood out to you in the conversation there?
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of them. That and a clear communication plan. But to your point, my leader actually was part of the core team that led that back in 2008. I wasn't doing the recruiting aspect back then, but that was critical. And our brand from a Dell standpoint was severely damaged. So your point about restarting, it was really tough for the first 3 to 4 years to really get back into where we were. And then we've grown so much and done so much at campus now that we just can't afford to throw away that investment. So you're absolutely right. But the communication plan was also extremely critical. And we had to manage that, of course, across all of North America, across about 52 different business units. And that's interns, but then that's also those that were starting full time. They wanted to, if you were supposed to move, do I get my reload package? Can I still come to Austin? What does that look like? So there was a lot of things that went into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I note that because I know we have so many education partners on the line. And I think sometimes when we're going through a pandemic, it can feel hopeless. It can feel quite tough because you're trying to help so many of your students find opportunities. And you keep hearing from so many employers, I'm not hiring right now, or I can't do this right now. But to know that there are lots of employers that are similar to Robert at Dell who don't want to lose that relationship. They work too hard for it and they want to continue to foster that. And so what are the things that you might be able to do to continue keeping up the relationship so that it's not lost? And as things start to rebound, your students and your institution are going to still be top of mind for those employers. So we'll kind of get into that in a little bit. Rufus, I want to transition over to you. You're in such a unique position, being the CEO and the head of League of Innovation. You partner with hundreds of community colleges. You see trends across multiple institutions, and you yourself have also led at a community college yourself. And so I'm curious, over the past year, what were the major trends that you saw? Did it pretty much match up with what Robert and Sandy were seeing? Or did you see some other differences that really kind of came out? And it can be broader than just college recruiting specifically. What were the major trends that you were faced with?
Well, I definitely saw the trends that they're describing. With our leadership colleges, with my board colleges, we started having a discussion once a month called Hot Topics. And one of the hot topics that we initiated early on was one on an article written by Mark Snyder with the Department of Ed. It was called Operation Reverse the Loss. And when you started listening to 17, 18 colleges, which represent my board colleges that were in attendance, you heard many of the aspects that are being mentioned today relative to the pandemic. You started looking at social issues, digital divide. You started looking at enrollment issues that were just hitting us right in the face with the double-digit declines. You started looking at social distancing and digital dexterity, all of the different things that impacted the conversation as to the pre-pandemic versus within the pandemic and the need for additional professional development. And out of that conversation, we started looking at how are each of the colleges addressing it? And in a term that Robert was using in terms of communities of practice. So we started looking at which colleges are focusing on what areas and what are some of the new changes or best practices that you're recommending that can be shared among all colleges and then replicating and scaling. One of the things that we started doing early on was, again, reimagining the future of community colleges in the new normal. I mean, that was a topic. We held webinars and we listened to individuals, and we started doing deeper dives in terms of what are the financial models looking like? Can we actually replicate or look at the depression, the recession in 2008 and use it as a guidepost? And this is different. So much of what we were able to recover within a 5 to 6 year period is probably not within our reach with this particular pandemic that we're in right now. And the whole notion in terms of workplace is the social distancing and workforce initiatives. How do you bring in major cohorts and have social distancing when you have equipment kind of requirements that are stationary that cannot be moved? We started moving to 24-hour schedules in order to accommodate individuals in order to meet the guidelines of the CDC and others. I think what has really happened also is the notion of leadership in these trying times, and trying to adjust our minds to the fact that we are not going back to whatever we thought was normal, that we need to establish the next normal, and we need to rethink and understand that being uncomfortable for the next 3 to 5 years, if not more, will be a norm. And how do you do that? And in a leadership role, talk about your outreach to the communities, engaging of employers, and thinking about the fact that we're moving from 16-week programs to 10-week, 8-week, and in many cases, fast track is part of our normal dialogue now. Micro credentials and micro pathways. What does that mean to guided pathways to students that want to get a 2-year degree and transfer to a 4-year institution? So the language is changing. It's becoming more normative, and there's fear. There's fear in our institutions. Many of our faculty will not come back. They're choosing it as a window to retire. When you were not part of the norm for virtual learning, and now you're put in that space, there are winners and losers on both sides. There are individual faculty members who have to ramp up immediately, and now they have to sustain that. Some of us really grow on one-to-one relationships, face-to-face, and how do we receive that in this new normal? So what the league is trying to do is provide a platform, a voice, an opportunity to, shall I say, kind of rethink and redefine the future. And for employers, I am trying to be the voice with connecting with our employers and with our faculty and staff to say that the role of faculty moving forward will change. And it will change in terms of technology, in terms of being a facilitator, in terms of artificial intelligence and virtual reality. Things that we thought would take 4 or 5 years are happening now, and we need to be more comfortable with that and deal with it and embrace the Dells and the Cuyahogas that are utilizing the new technology that are in the market, and those that are friendly to our students and that promote student success.
That's great. Thank you, Rufus. I think one of the things that I heard you say this phrase last time, and it really stuck with me, which is education needs to move at the speed of business. And I really liked what you said about that, because it emphasizes the need and the pace that is not often common in education, certainly not in higher education. And I think that's a really important piece as we try and bring these two worlds together and truly prepare our students for what's next and what could be next. I'm curious, Robert, going back to you from an employer standpoint and perspective, when you hear that phrase, education moving at the speed of business, what are some of the things that you would actually really like to see your community college partners do? What would make it easier for you to be able to partner with them, to be able to recruit their students and hire their students? If you had a wish list and everyone on this call just did it after they got off this conference call, what would that be?
So I'll just kind of think about the challenges we've had with community colleges. And just to set the tone, we're really new in the community college space from a structured standpoint. And so what I mean by that is we didn't have a program in October, and we have a very robust program today, mid-April, that's inclusive of headcount, where people manage our relationships and things like that. I was telling the team a little bit about some open roles and things, and that all came to fruition really from mid-October to the present. Some of the challenges that we've started to see are, I think, the community colleges that we've interacted with have been very open and actually really excited, as a matter of fact, from a partnership standpoint. I've seen some data out there, though, that attendees of community colleges, and I'd love to hear Sandy's thought on this, but attendees of community colleges are probably the most worried about getting a job, the traditional students anyway, but least likely to apply. And we've seen that in our journey thus far. Now, we officially launched our program February 3rd, so we are relatively new, but again, it's very robust. We've got a lot of infrastructure and buy-in. So we've had a lack of individuals that are actually ready to go and hit the apply button into some of our roles. What we've started to think about is how do we strengthen and deepen our engagement across these different campuses? What are some of the partnerships that we can do that are unique? They're very different than a four-year community college. I think individuals need to know that. Going to a community college is not like going to a four-year school in terms of the priorities of the students. They're dealing with a different set of priorities, and often they can't be bucketized. And I think we're learning that day by day as we go into these different arenas. So I just think about how can we help and how can we partner better to help have them ready for the call to action when you have a company like Dell or other major companies that kind of come and set up shop, and then they say, okay, here's our roles. You're not met with anxiety, because I feel like we kind of have created some anxiety in that space a little bit. So I don't know if that answered your question, but those are some of the challenges that we're going through a little bit. So when I think about some of the things I would like to see from a wish list is just how we partner better in that aspect for preparation.
The preparation is very key. I think that's super important. Are there pieces, I'm thinking about some of what Rufus was just talking about with micro credentials or skills gaps or things like that. Are there certain programs or things that you feel like you need to see more of at some of the community colleges you partner with, so that you're getting quite frankly, a larger pool of talent that can actually take that action to apply and make it through your process?
Yeah, I love the micro-credentialing. And again, just kind of setting the backdrop here, the reason why we started to target the community colleges was really to get to the skill level and away from, not necessarily all the way, but a little bit away from the theory, but really hone in on skills and applied sciences, if you will, there. We do have, for us, an education team, and we started to partner up with the instructional design leaders at some of these schools to understand where we can go in. What are some opportunities? We actually have a very idealistic externship opportunity that we're looking at doing around sales and some of our technical roles and things like that. So I think that's part of it, and really partnering and understanding, to your point of how fast the academia moves, and then in relative to how quickly business moves, how can we mitigate that through leveraging curriculum and externships to help prep them to the next level. So.
Super helpful. Thank you. Sandy, I'm curious your perspective. Are there one or two things that you've done in particular with employers that you've seen really makes a big difference in them looking very seriously at your students, in having a good brand or recognition of your student population, and students actually wanting to take that action that Robert was talking about and actually apply, or just feel more confident that they might be able to make it through the process? Are there a few things that you would share with your colleagues that have worked well for you all?
I would say one in particular is to start off, instead of an entry-level position, an internship, whether it's a regular internship or a micro internship, because I think that gives them an opportunity, I'll just say, to test the water. And I think they have a little bit more of a comfort level at that, because oftentimes, at community colleges, they're not the traditional student. As Robert mentioned, they have other priorities oftentimes. other commitments, whatever it might be. And I think that's a good way for them to test the water. Again, students don't know what they don't know. So if they haven't been brought up in an environment where their parents have different types of positions or things like that, oftentimes I try to tell them your internship is should be a safe place. It's an opportunity for them to learn not just the technical skills or things that they may need to be successful in the job, but also to learn those other soft skills or power skills. They need to understand time management. They need to learn how to be able to balance work and maybe going to school or their family or any other obligations they have. The critical thinking skills, the good communication skills. If you walk around with your cell phone in your pocket all day, or you text people, sometimes they text like they write. We try to use our internships often at Tri-C. We have what we call our summer internship program. And whether it's intern or external, we offer about 150 opportunities each year. And we tell our internal and external coaches or hires, intern managers, this is really an opportunity for the student to be able to apply what they've learned in the classroom, but also to learn those soft skills that are going to make them successful, so that when they get their next internship, they'll be able to continue to apply all of those things, whether it's the technical things or as well as the soft skills, professional things. So I think, to me, that's a great way to start off, to build a relationship with some of our students, not all, but some.
Yep.
And
And Sandy,
the internship route first.
That's super helpful. And Sandy, I'm curious how important, especially for the employers that are on the line today, how important is it for those internships and experiences to be paid?
Very important, especially from an equity standpoint. One of the things that we have really done, I think, a really, really good job with is we have even partnered with 10,000 Small Business, Goldman Sachs. And what we did was we ended up trying to get a grant so that we could provide our students, during the economic or pandemic, we had a lot of employers, small businesses in Cleveland that really needed help. And so we were able to get a grant to actually provide some support for interns to be able to, we paid the interns a stipend for them to be able to provide support to some of the small businesses in Cleveland. So that was one of the things that we did. So
that's great. That's great. Thank you. Rufus, you talked about this a little bit earlier, and I just want to make sure that we kind of touch on this. Obviously, most of us on the line have probably been following along with sort of enrollment trends this past year. We know that enrollment was down generally across higher education. We know that it was down for the first year students that were enrolling. We know that community colleges, unlike previous recessions, really took a hit in enrollment. And in particular, we know that some of our underrepresented students, like our Black students and our Latinx students, they felt that impact disproportionately, just as they did with COVID. And unfortunately, their enrollment really decreased in many ways. Now, I've also recently started to see a lot more articles talking about how community college enrollment is likely to really shoot back up in the next couple of years. And you touched on this briefly before, but I would love for you to sort of give us, what's your projection? What do you think? What do you predict might community college enrollment sort of look like as we look into the next 5 years? And do you anticipate that enrollment might actually look a little bit different than it did pre-pandemic? Do you anticipate that some students who historically would have gone on to four-year institutions initially might actually choose to do community college first before they go on to four-year? Tell us what you think.
I would definitely agree that one of the patterns that we saw in the 2008 recession was that we saw a number of individuals that actually had bachelor's degrees and others that were coming back to our institutions for reskilling and retraining. With the unemployment levels at the levels that they are now, and they're starting to recover, but they're recovering, excuse me, extremely slowly. Part of what you're seeing right now is a whole notion of having stimulus funding that it's not worth the time and effort to give up the stimulus funding if you're going back to a job that you don't know in this environment will be a sustainable job. So you hold on to the money that you need in your hand today. What we're found in our enrollment for our first generation low income families is the whole notion of that family nucleus. And so many of our students are students that need to work, but because they have not had a job, they've had to sacrifice, and as they come back, they will do it in a cautious fashion. What you read in the literature also is about the notion of, should I get a vaccination or not? I mean, that's looming in the back of your mind. What we need to do in terms of many of our community colleges is that we are becoming the face of a level of assurance that we can be that bridge to coming back. We can be that bridge to try to connect you with areas of safe places. Many of our community colleges gave up child care centers years ago from a profitability sense. Now we're talking about how can we bring them back in relationship to community providers and others. I also think that stimulus, the way it's going to individuals now, will be changed in the sense that there is a lot of discussion from the current leadership in Washington, the president and vice president, in terms of workforce allocations to get people back to work and to bridge with community colleges to have some of those support systems and to develop workforce programs that will allow for the fast track training and to put them in a position that they can get to work now, feed their families, address childcare, address the fact that hunger has increased, housing affordability has increased, and find a way to look at those places within the community that form an ecosystem, including the community colleges, hopefully at the center, in order to connect you to those opportunities of resources so that you can feel comfortable. Many of our individuals don't feel comfortable coming back now because we pivoted in multiple directions. So in terms of employers, I just wanted to end by addressing the whole notion of undergraduate STEM is being pushed by the National Science Foundation. And undergraduate STEM is construction, electricity, it's welding, it's all of these different places. I know of electricians here in the Valley that are paying $12 an hour to start your training as an electrician. When you're halfway there, they will give you another $2 to $3 to incentivize you to finish. More employers need to do this to show that there's a commitment on both sides. And then those students, those families will get a sense that they can take this job knowing that it has a longer term opportunity and that course is stackable to a 2-year if they want to come back, and they can move on to a 4-year if they desire to do that as well. So it's about putting all of these puzzle pieces together and providing a branding and a messaging that these are the opportunities. We can connect you and we can also support you with wraparound services as well.
I love that, Rufus. What a great example. And if we have any employers on the line today who are doing things like this already, please highlight that in the chat. I think you'd have a lot of folks on the line that would love to connect with you, would love to know more about that, would love to be able to highlight those opportunities. And if you don't yet, please start. I think what Rufus is talking about is quite apropos for what we're dealing with right now. Sandy, I'm curious from your perspective, as you think about this fall, we're heading back to what many are sort of saying will be a hybrid fall. And it may be hybrid for a lot of reasons. It could be hybrid for classes. It could be hybrid from recruiting standpoint. I'm curious, how are you and your team sort of approaching this fall? When you think about the services, again, sort of asking those questions again. What do my students need? How are things continuing to change? How can I best get them connected to the opportunities that are at hand? What will you all be doing? And how are you going to organize your services, your programs, and your events so that your students can get access to those opportunities best?
And Tri-C, it really will be a blended hybrid approach because there is no one size fits all. if anybody's worked with community colleges, we've talked about how we have non-traditional students. They go, they're anywhere from, a CCP student who might be 15 to an 80-year-old who may be interested in something. So this fall, again, ours will be more of a blended hybrid approach, in particular in the Career Center. We hopefully will be open. We're going to be on campus again, starting in June, only 2 days a week. And then in the fall, it could be potentially more days. So we will be offering some in-person events because we do know that some of our students would prefer to do things in person versus over the phone or virtually. We will be having some virtual events as well. So it'll be a combination. Our services as well as our programming will be a combination of both. But the other things that we are looking at is, as Rufus mentioned earlier on, some of our students, because of the pandemic, were really financially, hit by the pandemic, and do see that, it is finance is a barrier to coming back. So we're going to be launching this new initiative as part of our operations recovery sort of umbrella. And we're going to be targeting students that were financially impacted in certain first generation students. And we're having this initiative called Jobs First. And our Jobs First initiative will be trying to provide an employment opportunity to any student within a targeted population who needs some sort of employment in order to go to school, whether that is work study, whether that is a part-time job, a full-time job, or an internship. So that's one of the things that we are in the process right now in our design phase of trying to build that out a little bit more. So that's where we are for the fall.
That's great. I love that. Robert, I'm going to give you this next question. And it's partially from the audience, but I'm going to give it a little bit of context from my perspective as well. I know that employers like Dell, like many of the employers that we work with at Handshake, certainly prior to the pandemic, started moving in terms of a virtual recruiting strategy. And part of the reason why employers were doing this was because they wanted to diversify their applicant pool, right? They recognized that a core school strategy was not working for them and was not helping them get the diversity of talent that they were sort of looking for. Now, obviously, the pandemic accelerated all of that. Similar to what Rufus said, what we had anticipated would take 2 to 3 years more for people to kind of get on board with virtual recruiting, it really got condensed down to 2 to 3 months. All of a sudden, everybody was doing it now, right? And of course, given the events of society and everything that our country is dealing with right now, we see more and more employers trying to make a commitment to diversify their organizations to actually reflect the communities in which they serve or in which they are partners with. So for you, what advice do you have for career centers or for community colleges in how to articulate to employers the benefit and the value of recruiting at community colleges instead of just the elite schools? I think many of our partners on this call sometimes feel like there's definitely that barrier and employers are just not interested. How would you help them articulate that? As an employer, what would you have wanted to hear? Obviously, you're already bought in, but how would you help them convince other employers?
Yeah, certainly. And that's actually a really good question. And just for context, I don't even know if we stated it, but I lead the D&I strategy for North America in campus recruiting. That's my whole role of what we do, right? So ultimately, I think the biggest thing and the reason why we shifted was closing the digital divide. Rufus, I think you said it earlier, it's closing the digital divide, helping to educate URM so they are workforce ready. As much as Dell wants to hire as many, we really want to place in helping closing that divide, and we want to play a huge role in that. I think when I think about going to community colleges, and if I'm a community college, what my pitch is that we are creating ready-made students. We're getting away from where you have to have, this huge degree and the plaque and things like that, but students that are ready to get into the workforce. Specifically, our courses, our curriculum are things that are a little bit more skills-based, where they can jump into a role and be ready to perform just as quick as someone, and actually probably a little bit quicker than someone that has to go through a development program or something like that. That's all right. So I think that's the big thing. I think the other thing is when you think about, and this goes for both 4 and 2 year, but one of the challenges is most companies are looking for those places that are more of a minority serving institution, not necessarily HBCU, not necessarily Hispanic serving institution, but where you've got a rainbow of colors that I can go and have a one-stop shop to have that. And that data needs to be readily available and articulated to employers. That would be a very nice to have, to be able to see that. And then also openness to partnering to help influence that a little bit through other pathways from that community. So if it's through high school programs or other alternative programs to help flow that talent into your institution, where companies such as Dell and others can partner with you and then ultimately hire long-term. So.
Very helpful. Thank you. You might be getting some consulting calls from folks after this.
$50 an hour. No, I'm just kidding.
Sandy, there's a few questions that have come in that I think you can take kind of from the Community College Career Center point of view. One in particular is, how do you advise students to take advantage of internship opportunities when they might pay less and the time frame might be shorter, because the job that they might be working may actually make a lot more in order for them to support their families, for example? How do you advise the students and kind of think through that with them?
As I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we've tried to do as part of a reimagining our career center this year because of the pandemic was to find more micro internship opportunities, the gig work, because we really need to make sure that they understand the value that an internship will bring to them. We've tried to increase the amount of money that we're paying someone for a micro internship, because again, this is a project-based assignment, a short-term project-based assignment. So instead of someone making $11 or $12 an hour, they're making $15 to $20 an hour. And it's only going to be anywhere from a 10-hour project to a 40-hour project. That still gives them value, whether it's IT, if somebody's in IT and you're redesigning someone's website, or it's a creative arts or creative design project that you're doing. Those are the kinds of things we really try to underscore the value of an internship. It's not just about the dollar amount. It's about helping you become more competitive in the workplace when you get ready to graduate, so that you can really show that you clearly have been able to apply the skills that you've learned. And that you will be ready to hit the ground running, because you can really show the value that you bring there, but also that network that you're going to build just by having that internship as well. You can't put a dollar amount on that one. So those are the kinds of things that we really try to underscore when we're talking to students. And again, there is no one size fits all. So if you can't do this, 10-week or 15-week internship, then talk to us. Maybe we can try to get this micro internship project for you. And again, being able to, the dollar amount is greater as well.
Very helpful. Do you find that most students, as they're thinking about internships, they often want to be able to keep their full-time job and do the micro internship, or do the internship kind of on the side? Or do you find that many are really trying to weigh that difference between, okay, I'm going to maybe quit and take this internship in hopes that something will come out of this internship? What are you mostly seeing? What are the trends or patterns?
I'll tell you, I've seen it all. I've seen it all. When we piloted our micro internship program in the fall, we had a young lady who was had a part-time job, participated in our micro internship pilot, ended up getting COVID during that time period, but also graduated in December. She did it all. It was amazing. And because of that internship, she ended up getting a full-time job.
That's great. What a success
at graduation. So again, a lot of it is, promoting that, using that person, or not using that person, but asking that person to, tell her story. Because I think that when we can tell students all day that this is a value to you, but when it's peer to peer, oftentimes they listen.
Super helpful. Thank you. Rufus, I'm curious, are there specific things that you would like to, actually, this perfectly coincides with a question here. Are there specific things that you would really like to see community colleges do, either on their own or in partnership with the League of Innovation, or for the employers that are on the call, things that they can individually do or do in collaboration with the League of Innovation, that you would love to sort of put a call to action out today, that you would love for people to sort of take up and move forward?
Well, I would like to answer that question with the follow-up to a question you asked Sandy.
Mhm.
The League for Innovation is currently involved in a project called Community College Growth Engine Fund. We are working with an organization called Education Design Lab, which initiated the project, and it's regarding I help them source colleges to identify finally 6 colleges across the country to do micro credentials, to do 2 micro credentials and 2 micro pathways, and to work with employers within their own regional area, and to provide internships. So the colleges we picked are Seattle, Austin, Pima Community College here in Arizona, Ivy Tech, Prince George's in Maryland, and the CUNY system. They will each do 2 particular projects, and I'm helping to facilitate the community of practice discussion as to how did you work with your employer on this particular micro pathway? What are the opportunities for internships? How are they being accepted? What is the price points? And can they be exchangeable to different parts of the country? Is the model replicable and scalable? So these are the kinds of things that the community colleges that we're working with are trying to do, because the need is there and we need a new model.
Yeah.
And if we can get a new model, then I'll also respond more directly to your question on enrollment. Enrollments will start to scale because people are connecting the whole notion of workforce, skill-based training, connections with a stronger relationship with employers to increased enrollment. And if you can do that and also work with accrediting agencies to talk about the fact that quality assurance cannot be defined with a master's degree or a master's degree plus 18 hours in the area to be taught. Employers can bring to the table the experience and the type of employees that they are hiring that do not meet that traditional profile. But you can also state that a stackable credential can get you to that 2-year or 4-year degree, so that others aren't threatened with the fact that the population and the workforce credentials are changing. And the role of the league is to initiate those conversations and to see if we can help find answers and solutions and have people talk about it.
Super helpful. Thank you. Sandy, we have another question that just came in for you. And then I will give you and Robert the last question, which has to do with Handshake in particular. Sandy, do you find that students run into limited access with internships due to business security protocols that make it more difficult to get the full experience of work?
No, I haven't. I haven't ran into that problem at all, not at Tri-C, not with the internships that we've had with the employers. We typically have a pretty in-depth conversation, whether it's internal or external, so that we make sure that the students are able to have the access to what they need to have access to, meaning that we'll look at the project or the opportunity that they have, and from that discussion, we'll be able to make that determination. But so far, we have not.
Terrific. Great. Good to hear. So for Robert and Sandy, Robert, let's start with you from the employer perspective, and then we'll go to you, Sandy. We had a question that came in here that said, what are some of the specific benefits of using Handshake over other types of similar platforms? And I assume, obviously, Robert, from your perspective, it would be from a recruiting standpoint, and Sandy, from your perspective, connecting students to opportunities. So would love to hear your perspectives there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest things about Handshake is its ability to grow and scale and get you into places that you ordinarily wouldn't be. So it's proprietary, but it's not proprietary, if that makes sense. So we were able to reach many more individuals in, let's say, a Handshake campaign than we would be in other avenues. It also, for us has been easy across several segments. Right. So it's just not in one segment, but you can leverage campaign to go across different parts of the industry, whether it's, finance or marketing specific versus engineering, and then breaking down engineering into different, pockets and types, which are things that we're plagued with as we try to find the right candidates across, North America. So that's been the biggest piece of it. It's very organic. So you've got an opportunity to actually create relationships in Handshake, which has been really, really good as well. So
that's super helpful. And Robert, do you all utilize the ambassador feature yet or not yet on Handshake?
we utilize the ambassador feature. Now, I don't touch it as much. My team doesn't touch it as much. But inside of our university relations team, we do have the ambassador program rolling. And I think it's doing okay, actually. So.
Sounds good. Sounds good. And for those on the line that are a little less familiar with some of the terms that Robert used, campaigns are essentially segmented emails that can go out to students, letting them know about a job, about an internship, about an event that Dell might be hosting or that an employer might be hosting. And I know from some of the previous employers that I've hosted events with before, they really pay attention to which students are opening. They pay attention to which students click through those messages. They pay attention to which students respond to those messages. So as a point of preparation, kind of going full circle back to one of the things that Robert talked about at the beginning, that's one of the ways in which you can prepare your students to be seen and to be more visible, is remind them that these are real messages from employers and they should take the time to respond or to take the action that the employer is asking them to take by attending the event or the info session or whatever the case may be. The ambassador piece really speaks to the relationship component that Robert was just talking about. So it's a fairly new feature in Handshake, and we're actually looking to build it out even more robustly in the coming year. But right now, some of our employers utilize ambassadors to be able to actually meet with students. And these are ambassadors that work at the company, but are not necessarily always part of the recruiting team. Sometimes they might be alums of the institution. Sometimes they might be part of the recruiting team, but maybe not the recruiter for that particular position. And they're able to just have a more candid and open conversation with students around, what is it really like to be at Dell? What is it really like to be on this team? What are the things that you might need to know to be successful here? So on and so forth. And again, it just helps to humanize a process that is already kind of anxiety ridden for a lot of students, and to make it feel a little bit more organic or natural, as Robert was talking about. So we're really excited to kind of continue to surface some of those pieces, especially for some of our campus partners as we move forward as well. Sandy, how about you? What's your perspective?
From my perspective, I think, Handshake has provided an opportunity for our students to connect with more employers. I think it really has put us more at a level playing field, meaning that some of our four-year partners, different organizations or different employers, previously hadn't even thought about Tri-C, but now they're posting on Tri-C's site. What we have found is that some employers earlier on were saying, we no longer have the bandwidth to post on, 5 different career sites out there. We're going to pick one. We're going to use Handshake. And not that they weren't interested in any of our students, but again, not having the bandwidth in their HR department to post on all these different sites. So again, it provides our students, I think, with a level playing field of, as far as having increased opportunities, employment opportunities. But the other thing that I really like is that this tool allows employers, as long as the student has a completed profile, it allows employers to basically go out and outreach them and send personalized messages and things like that. And I think our students really like that a lot.
That's fantastic. And for those that oh, go ahead. No,
and last but not least, this has allowed us to partner with our four-year colleagues as well. We're doing what we're calling the Big East Career Fair this Friday, and it's going to be 12 colleges and universities, 2 and 4 year in Northeast Ohio. So that's pretty cool. So I'm excited about that.
Oh, that's awesome. That's so fantastic to hear. And just to kind of build off of that, there are a few other things that we want to continue to build out to make this easier. So one of the things that we recognize, we talked about on today's panel, is that students might go from 2-year to 4-year to grad school to becoming an employer. They might go back to 2-year again to get reskilled or to get more education, right? The path of education is becoming less linear, and it's becoming more robust and more holistic. And so one of the things that we want to make sure we do from a Handshake perspective is make it easier for a Handshake account to travel with the student so that as they come in, that's their account, they hold on to it as they go from institution to institution. They don't have to create a new account, repopulate all the same information on their profile, but rather that sticks with them. I'll be honest, it's a lot of architectural engineering on the back end, but we are making it work. And over the next year or two, you're going to hear a lot more about that. But Sandy, I think that really speaks to that transition and makes it a little bit easier. The profile is incredibly important for students who complete their profile. They're 80% more likely to get a message from a Robert or from an employer. And that's super important. So don't let your students miss out on some of those opportunities. Thank you all so much. I want to be sensitive to everyone's time. I know that we are at the end. This was a great conversation. Rufus, Robert, Sandy, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.